From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries,
it came from the Maritimes.
The thing nightmares are made of. Introducing my co-host, Evan.
Scaring away those meddling kids. My co-host, Chelsea.
Hi everyone. Welcome to It Came From The Maritimes, a podcast sharing Atlantic Canada folklore. We have some ghost stories for you today. We're going to be sharing sightings of the spirits haunting a famous Halifax location, Citadel Hill. Now, when I was in elementary school, I remember going to the Citadel on a school trip. We had to dress up in late 19th century attire and pretend to be a child from that time period. I have two big memories from that field trip. One, I was not expecting the noontime cannon to go off, and I ended up screaming, assuming that the Citadel was actually under attack. And the second is my friend and I were exploring the walls of the Citadel, where you can wander through those kind of dark, rocky, tunnel-like structures. And my dad, who was a chaperone for the field trip, hid behind one of the corners in the wall and jumped out at us. Questionable chaperone decision and a traumatic trip all in all. Evan, have you ever visited the Citadel?
Yes, I did. I imagine on a similar field trip a couple years after you. I don't remember the 19th century attire, if we're being honest, but maybe I was just...
You repressed it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember wearing, I don't even know what 19th century clothing. Pantaloons. I don't remember wearing any pantaloons.
I remember they gave us a character card. Like I had to be a little girl named like Emily, and my father was a soldier with one of the regiments or something. Maybe they cut it out in the 2 years between when you and I went.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a statement about the state of education more than anything, but I don't remember that.
Things went downhill fast in those 2 years, let me tell you. So I am going to start with just a little bit of history about Citadel Hill, mostly because when I was reading this, I found it super fascinating. I always assumed that the structure currently standing on Citadel Hill was the original, but I learned that there were actually multiple structures that preceded the current stone fortress. The Citadel was first built in its current location in 1749 by British colonists. At that time, it was a wooden garrison near the top of the hill overlooking the harbour. Unfortunately, due to our damp maritime climate, the wooden structure rotted. So in 1776, they rebuilt, and this time they built a wooden structure into the hill itself to provide reinforcement, and they also added trenches and batteries. The second fort ended up collapsing due to neglect, so Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, had the third citadel structure built in 1794 on the very top of the hill, this time using logs and earth, which I don't know why we didn't learn from the first two wooden garrisons, but those also ended up essentially dissolving. So in the 1820s, tensions were high between Britain and the United States, so they decided a more permanent defense structure was needed in case the United States decided to attack the British naval dockyard in Halifax. In 1828, the star-shaped stone fortress that is still standing today was built, and it's been there ever since. So the Halifax Citadel has never seen battle, but it has been used extensively during war times. In World War I, it was used as a command center for the defense of Halifax Harbour if it was needed, and as a soldier barracks. And it was used as barracks in World War II. And it was actually the last place that troops would stay in Canada before sailing overseas. Evan, did you know that the Citadel had so many different buildings?
Honestly, I had never really thought about it. This is probably something I should have learned over the years. Like, honestly, just doing this podcast, I've learned a surprising amount about history that I just never knew in Nova Scotia. So I didn't know about that, but it's really neat to learn. And I'm glad that they figured out that stone doesn't rot like wood does.
That's it. It only took 4 tries. They got around to it eventually. Now, in 1950, the Halifax Citadel became a National Historic Site. And as most people in Nova Scotia know, you can still visit it today to get a glimpse into the life of a Victorian-era soldier. You can explore its old structures, you can see the prison cells and tunnels that line the fortification's walls, and, as I mentioned before, if you're there midday, you can hear that noontime cannon. You can also visit after dark to partake in a ghost tour. And that's something I did last summer. I found these stories were really fascinating and they piqued my interest. And then I found out there's a book called Ghosts and Folklore of the Halifax Citadel National Historic Site, written by Thompson. He's a previous employee of the Citadel, so he has a lot of stories from past employees that I feel like a lot of the tour guides might not have even known at the time because he worked there for so many years. So today, inspired by his book and the ghost tour I took last summer, which I would highly recommend to anyone, I'll be sharing stories about the spirits of those who once resided in the Halifax Citadel but didn't want to leave. You can imagine that a building that's been around for so long is full of history. So let's start by talking about the presences lurking around the Cavalier building. I'd also like to point out that I specifically wore my ghost shirt for this episode, so...
We have a picture so you can see at home.
We do.
So you know what it's like to just be hanging here with me and Chelsea.
Helps inspire me to get in that spooky story mood. So the Cavalier building at the Halifax Citadel is the largest structure in the fort. It has 3 floors, a 2-story veranda, and rows of windows. It was used as the main quarters for officers and a keep in case the fort was invaded. These days, it is most famous for being haunted by the ghost of a young woman who has been seen on several occasions wearing a gray-white 19th century style dress.
Question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What color dress did you wear when you need to wear 19th century clothing?
Do you know what? I don't know, and now I'm starting to wonder if I actually made up the dressing part of this field trip.
Well, I'm just wondering if this is actually just was you running around.
Honestly, I would have pretended to be a ghost if I was there. But I feel like it was probably blue. But once again, I could be making that up.
I don't know why, but blue seems like the type of color that would be that era's clothing.
Right? Maybe it's because it's the Nova Scotia tart and it has that vibe. Now, this spirit of the young woman at the Cavalier building is suspected to be Cassie Allen. She is a young woman who was engaged to a battery sergeant, Major George Edwards. He was a soldier stationed at the Citadel. Their wedding was set for November 14th, 1900, but on the day, Cassie stood alone at the altar. She waited at Trinity Church while a carriage driver went to find her groom-to-be, but the carriage driver returned with the sad news that her betrothed had shot himself. It turns out he was already married to a woman living in an asylum in Bermuda. Another soldier confronted him when he found out, appalled that this Major George Edwards would have the audacity to try to marry Cassie when he was already committed to another. And the two started fighting. Major George Edwards ended up breaking the other man's neck in the fight, and instead of facing life in prison and the disappointment of Cassie, he chose to end his own life. When the driver reported the sad news, Cassie refused to believe he was dead and stayed in a chair in Trinity Church for the remainder of the day. So that chair that she was sitting in when she was told of Edward's suicide was actually donated by Trinity Church to the Citadel, and it appears that this chair ended up bringing the spirit of Cassie with it. An employee whose task it is to sit in that very chair each day to greet visitors reported one day seeing a woman in an old-fashioned white dress smelling of roses enter the exhibit room. The employee stood up to greet the young woman, but with the blink of an eye she disappeared. He assumed she must have ducked out quickly, but he looked out the windows and he didn't see anyone. And because of the layout of the window and the veranda, it would have been impossible for someone to escape without his noticing. He ended up seeing this ghostly figure on multiple occasions, and every time he stood up to try to approach her, she would disappear. She's also been spotted by a security guard at the Citadel, who reported seeing a woman in an old gray-white dress staring out of the 3rd floor window of the Cavalier building, even though it was supposed to be unoccupied. The security guard went upstairs to investigate, but he found out that the door to that floor was locked. When he opened it to check, no one was inside, and it would have been impossible for them to escape. She's also been seen by numerous people walking along the veranda, but as soon as she turns the corner, if someone follows her, she disappears. She's also been seen walking through a closed barrack room door. The ancient willow rocking chair that used to belong to the Trinity Church that she had been sitting in that tragic day has also been seen and heard rocking back and forth. But as soon as it's checked on, the rocking will stop. People also see the flicker of a lantern on the 2nd story of the veranda when no one is up there. It appears the story of Cassie is still searching for her lost love, even in death. I find it's an interesting story because she didn't die at the Citadel, but it seems this chair where it had such a strong impact on her life, or where she was when she had such a tragic event happen, and it brought her with them. They've looked into other possible sources for the ghost, but there's been no real female deaths at the Halifax Citadel in records, and usually those military records are pretty solid.
Yeah, when you said that, I was kind of wondering if I missed something where she had died at the Citadel, but I guess it was just something where it was such an important moment in her life that the theory would be that her spirit would have been tied to that moment. And
exactly. They've also seen this same gray lady standing near the clock tower at times, so worth keeping an eye on it if you're ever near the clock tower in Halifax at dusk.
Yeah, I guess so.
I actually have kind of a funny story to share about this specific ghost story from when I did the ghost tour at the Citadel last summer. So for the last part of the tour, we were sitting on the 2nd story of the veranda while we were being told the story of the gray lady, and all of a sudden I saw a white flash below. I looked over the veranda and was consumed by panic when I saw a woman in a long white dress. And I remember in that moment thinking, like, this is it.
Yeah.
I've seen a ghost. But then all of a sudden, the woman pulled a pack of cigarettes out of her dress, and I realized she was wearing a veil and there was a wedding there that night, and she was just a bride sneaking out for a cigarette. But she had me thinking she was a ghost.
I mean, to be fair, I would be thinking the same thing.
Right? It makes me wonder how many other people have had something similar happen, because I feel like there's quite a few weddings there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's other two apparitions seen in the Cavalier building. We won't spend too much time on them because they aren't quite as elaborate in their haunting as the Grey Lady is. So there's one World War II soldier who has been seen in a khaki uniform who stands on the second floor veranda, but steps into the wall and disappears if you approach him. And there's another soldier ghost who has been glimpsed out of the corner of people's eye, but his most prominent haunting is that his footsteps are heard climbing to the second floor veranda after he's glimpsed. And they're also heard on a stone spiral staircase on the south wall that is currently bricked in, so it's inaccessible.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, that's not the most exciting soldier ghost at the Halifax Citadel that I heard about.
Okay.
So across Parade Square, there's the spirit of a sergeant who haunts Casement 18. In the 1800s, there was this one sergeant who took advantage of his position of power. He harassed the other soldiers, and his brutal treatment of them was infamous around the Citadel. He was hated by everyone. On December 11th, 1850, there was a fire in the Wooden North Barracks that consumed the barracks and 40 surrounding homes in Halifax. That very night, the sergeant disappeared. The night had been chaotic as people ran back and forth putting out the fire, so people assumed the sergeant took advantage of the confusion to desert his post. No one searched for him because his mean behavior was far from missed. The following winter of 1851, the water developed a terrible taste. They checked the well in Casement 18, where the majority of the water was stored, and they tried to haul the water up in the bucket, but they met resistance. Finally, they got some leverage, and as the bucket was raised, they found a decomposing arm tangled in the ropes. It had the badge of the sergeant on the fabric of the sleeve, and when they retrieved the rest of the body, they determined that it was the missing sergeant. For obvious reasons, they did not use this particular well again, but the well can actually still be seen through a hatch in the floor of Casement 18, and ever since his body has been found, the apparition of an armless sergeant has been spotted standing guard on the North Parade Square, outside or inside Casement 18. Pretty gross, eh?
Yeah, that's not great. So I guess it sounds like maybe during the fire he tried to hide in the well, I guess.
So there's some rumors that apparently there was this one private who was a victim of a lot of his bullying, and he went missing the same night. So there's some rumors that people suspect this private murdered him, hid his body, and then the private ran away in the chaos.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's either he accidentally got, because maybe he was trying to retrieve water and fell in. That's the more peaceful. His body was so decomposed they couldn't figure out the cause of death.
No.
But just where this private went missing, it makes you think.
Just to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a ghost of a World War II soldier who was seen.
Yes.
In the Cavalier building there. Would there be a reason why a World War II soldier would be seen in the Citadel? Like, did the Citadel see any action during World War II?
No action, but since some World War II soldiers stayed there before being shipped overseas, it's possible he died from like illness or...
Okay, so there would have been soldiers who would stay there.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I was like, I don't think that was really involved in World War II.
No, the Citadel never actually saw a fight. Now, we're going to talk about one ghost that I find this one interesting just because it has a bit of a modern flair, which we don't see in a lot of ghost stories, at least not the ones I've heard so far in our podcast adventure. So this is about the ghost of the curtain wall. So the west curtain wall sits along the edge of the Citadel, and contained within it is an audio-visual exhibit that shows a series of videos that tell us the story of Halifax. So there was always a bit of a rumor about this curtain wall, that one of the stonemasons who worked on it in 1960 was having an affair, and he ended up murdering his mistress and burying her within the wall when she threatened to tell his wife. Now, this has never been substantiated, but there have been rumors of nefarious deeds in that area of the Citadel. So over the years, employees have reported an eerie presence within that exhibit. There have been multiple reports of employees feeling watched, especially in Theater 4. People have reported seeing shadows as high up as 8 feet in the air, and one member of the cleaning staff has heard whispering in her ear when she's in the building alone at night. There's frequent bumps and creaks, and doors will open and close when no one else is there. Now, this is an old building, so none of those are things that are particularly, outstanding, but the door to Theater 1 has opened on multiple occasions, even when a doorstop was firmly wedged under the door.
Oh.
Right, so that's a little more mysterious. Now, this is where it gets a little more exciting. In May 2004, it was a rainy day with no visitors. An employee was sitting at the reception desk of this audiovisual exhibit, occasionally checking the monitors that show the 4 theaters, just to make sure no one had snuck in with her unaware. In the middle of her shift, she glanced at the monitors and saw a gray outline of a human head and shoulders on the monitor for Theater 4, as if someone was standing right in front of the camera. The face of the shape was featureless, but what was more alarming is that the camera was high up near the ceiling.
This is some horror movie stuff.
I know. I would have probably died on the spot if I saw that.
Oh, I'd be out of there.
Yeah, that alone, I would have been so freaked out. Now, this employee assumed that someone had snuck in and was playing a prank, so she went to investigate. But when she got to Theater 4, the room was empty. The way the exhibit is laid out, anyone in the room would have had to go past her to leave, and at the very least, she would have heard footsteps of someone trying to run and hide. But there was no evidence that anyone had actually physically been in that room. Now, on another rainy day, there was an employee monitoring the cameras when he glanced at the display for Theater 4 and saw a man wearing a naval uniform standing in the middle of it. Now, at first, he assumed it must have just been one of his co-workers who was in costume, who maybe where it was a slow day, he had decided to check out the exhibit himself. But he was confused because the man was standing with his back to the camera, rifling through the items on the desk, and anyone who works at the Citadel would know you're not supposed to touch these artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this display area has a chest-high railing blocking it, so it would have been an effort to get past this railing to touch the exhibit items.
Yeah.
The employee ran to Theater 4, but when he got there, it was empty, and he thoroughly checked the display, and there was no sign it had actually been disturbed. The barrier would have taken a minute to climb back over, so it's highly unlikely that someone would have been able to climb over it and run out of the theater before he got there. On the same day, another employee who took over the shift when the first one was fairly enough a little disturbed, he saw a man in a dark uniform standing in Theater 3, and when he rushed to investigate, no one was there. So it seems like there's some sort of ghost of an old naval officer haunting that area.
I wonder if that guy, that ghost owned something that was on that table.
Ooh, I never thought of that. That's an interesting idea,
Why
though.
was he looking at it, right?
Right. Now, this exhibit has had some strange technical issues as well. One employee saw a lightning bolt shoot out of the top of the video monitor and arc across the room to the opposite wall. Maintenance checked, but there was no explanation and no damage to any of the equipment. Now, that's something that, I don't know, computers sometimes have static or something. I can see there being maybe a possible explanation. This next part, a little tougher to explain. So one day, no matter what troubleshooting an employee did, the videos from each of the 4 separate theaters were not only playing in the wrong theaters, but they were playing only in French. Now, this would be impossible. It's not like it's all run from one computer. Each DVD player in each theater is hardwired into its own specific projector. So there's no realistic way, unless someone was physically changing the DVDs, that it would have been playing on a different screen.
So strange.
Right? That's the thing that confuses me, because apparently the guy went to the front desk to call someone for help, and then when he went back to the theaters, it had sorted itself out. So either we have a very fast-working prankster or a very technologically savvy ghost.
Well, I mean, and it was a British fort, so why would these ghosts be putting on French?
Well, very true. Evan, you're asking the big questions.
I know.
Now, that's not the only spirit on the Curtain Wall that has been seen. A Victorian soldier has been seen strolling along the ramparts above the West Curtain Wall. Multiple visitors to the Citadel have pointed this spirit out, assuming when they first see him that it's just an employee of the Citadel, but he's wearing an outfit that none of the employees in costume would ever wear, so it makes us wonder who he is.
Yeah.
Now, there's another section of the Citadel called the Redan, and I might be mispronouncing that. I'm sorry if I am. My army lingo is not super.
Honestly, I'd assume that you're right, so.
Thank you. So the Redan is a V-shaped section of the wall to the right of the main gate, and it used to be the officers' quarters and mess hall. In this building, near the senior officer's locker room, a night commissaire was doing his rounds when he felt a hand on his right shoulder. When he turned around, no one was there. In the early 1990s, an employee who was in charge of the noon gun was putting on his uniform in the senior locker room. He started going up the adjacent staircase when he heard the distinct scraping sound of metal-shod military boots on the concrete at the bottom of the staircase. He then heard the sound of someone climbing the stairs behind him. There were only 3 people on the site that day because it was Christmas Eve, so it wasn't open to visitors, and the other 2 were nowhere near the building at that time. When he called out, the footsteps stopped, and when he went downstairs to investigate, no one was there. There have been other incidents at that building of flying cutlery, but just outside the Redan, there is a story that is one that I remembered vividly from the ghost tour I did. So outside this area, in the middle of the parade square, on multiple tours of the Citadel, people have reported their hand being grasped by a young child, only to turn and see no one there. Some people have even reported seeing a hand and bare arm reach out to them that's connected to nothing. So this is my worst nightmare. As soon as they told that story on the ghost tour, I clenched my fists and did not unclench them.
Yeah, like I'm imagining, was it Thing from the Addams Family?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not great.
No, would not enjoy. Now, just one more story to share, and thank you for hanging in with me because I know this is a little bit of a long one. There were just so many good stories to share. So, the garrison cells are located in the southwest corner of the fort within the walls, and they're at the bottom of 33 steps. It's a cool and musty area with a small brick court, and it faces 2 defense casemates, which were intended to contain guns so they could defend the walls of the citadel if it were under siege. In the 1840s, these cells were occasionally used to contain drunk soldiers. The cell on the left has a door and window, but the one on the right is a contained space. So there's one way to enter it, but then there's just 2 windows covered with iron bars. People have heard unexplained sounds within the cells, such as metallic rattling and creaking hinges. One night, 2 employees heard shuffling outside the cells and the sound of iron-shod boots coming down the 33 steps towards them. The footsteps stopped right outside the garrison door, and the employees looked out expecting to see one of their co-workers, but no one was there. It would have been impossible for someone to go up the stairs without being seen. There has also been a man in an outdated blue coat from the 1830s seen within the cell. Now, that's another costume that just wouldn't be used by any of the employees at the Citadel. So he's been spotted through the cell window by visitors descending the stairs, and then they walk inside and there's no one in there, even though there's no alternative exit. I feel like I'd be creeped out.
There's apparently a lot of ghosts around there. I didn't know.
There's so many, and I feel like in the book there were even more, but it's just for the sake of time.
Oh, yeah.
These were kind of the main ones, but yeah, there's so many spooky encounters. But when you think about the fact that that site has been used since 1749 and the current building's been in place since 1828, that's a lot of time, even if it wasn't a site of battle, just because there were the fires and other tragic events, the Halifax explosion.
Oh, yeah, so many things. You see, the only rumors or stories I ever heard about the Citadel were that once a little girl managed to shove a Barbie head into the noontime cannon. And I'm not sure how real that is, but that's the only rumor I ever heard.
Maybe that's the little arm people see reaching out towards them during the tour.
I mean, I bet it would be a lot easier for a little creepy hand to just sneak right in.
Right into that noon cannon. Even though the fortress no longer serves military use, the ghosts of the Citadel still stand guard over the city of Halifax. The next time you visit this National Historic Site, keep your eyes peeled to see if any of the spirits make themselves known.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of It Came From The Maritimes. You can find us on social media on Instagram and Facebook at It Came From The Maritimes, on X at ICFT Maritimes, and if you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you would like to see covered in a future episode, or if you have any spooky stories of your own, please email us at itcamefromthemaritimes@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find us. We want to end each episode by sharing a piece of Nova Scotia folklore advice that we found in our reading. Please don't take this advice seriously, it's just a bit of fun. Chelsea, would you like to share this with us?
So we thought this one was relevant because of the story about the Grey Lady and her rocking chair in the Cavalier building. According to Nova Scotians, rocking an empty chair will cause a death in the family.